We sold the house, Dad. You have to be out before the end of the month. Just like that. Cold blunt without a, "How are you, Dad?" No hug, no smile, not even a respectful glance. He just walked in with that skinny lawyer in a navy blue suit holding a folder and delivered the sentence like he was dropping off a package. I was sitting at my table with my black coffee and a warm piece of toast with butter on my plate. I looked at them both, took a calm bite, chewed slowly, and said nothing. My name is David Miller. I'm 81 years old. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, though now I live in a quiet suburb just outside the city. I've spent almost my entire life in this same house, a simple but warm home that I built with my own 2 hands, brick by brick, alongside my wife, Linda Rose. Every corner of this house holds a story. This is where my children took their first steps, said their first words. This is where I cried when I lost my Linda, and where I also learned to be silent when the world wanted me to scream. Because some pain isn't meant for screaming. It's meant to be swallowed. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, as if he knew he was doing something wrong. He was a young man no older than 30. He wore thin framed glasses and spoke in a polite but distant voice. He opened the folder, took out some papers, and placed them on the table. Your son and his wife have already signed the sales contract. The property has been legally transferred. We just need you to vacate the premises. I didn't even touch the paper. I kept eating my toast, took a sip of coffee, and wiped my mouth with the napkin on my lap. Interesting, was all I said. Not a single emotion on my face. But inside my chest was on fire. I saw myself in that moment. An old man with rough hands, weathered skin, a face full of lines from a long life, but with eyes that were still alive, very much alive. I knew what this meant. It wasn't just losing the house. It was being discarded like a piece of old furniture, an inconvenience. And the worst part was that it came from someone I had carried on my shoulders for years. His name is Michael, my firstborn. The one I gave an education, food, a roof over his head. The one I carried to the hospital in my arms when he had asthma, when no one else wanted to get up in the middle of the night. The one I defended even when he made mistakes as a teenager, and I got calls from the school. The same one who now walks in here with a lawyer and wants to throw me out. So, do you understand, Mr. Miller? The young man in the suit asked. I looked him straight in the eye, calm but firm. I understand, son, perfectly clear. Michael didn't move. He stood there, arms crossed, staring at the floor. He didn't even have the courage to look at me. And still I wondered, does he feel any doubt in his heart, a little bit of regret? But no. When he finally lifted his head, what I saw was coldness, distance. As if I were a problem, not a father. They said their goodbyes quickly. They mentioned they would be back in a few days to sort out the moving details. I walked them to the gate calmly, without rushing, and closed it slowly after they left. I stood there for a long time looking at the dirt in my small yard. My dog Buddy came over and rested his head on my leg. I scratched him behind the ears and went back inside. The house was silent the way it always is after a blow. I sat down in the rocking chair, where I usually listen to the radio. I took a deep breath, and only then did I let a single tear fall. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was rage. A quiet but heavy indignation. Because I know myself, I know when my soul starts to slowly rise up. I'm not a man who looks for fights. I never have been. But I'm also not a man who tolerates injustice. I'm not a weak old man. I'm a man who has lived. I've seen a lot in this life. I was a construction worker, a welder, a truck driver. I worked under the hot sun to pay for schools, uniforms, food. I've lived through different presidents, recessions, losses, and now to be treated like this, as if I were a shadow. That same day, I made some rice and beans and ate while looking at the picture of Linda on the refrigerator. She was smiling with that serene look like someone who understands everything without saying a word. My love, I swear, they're not going to kick me out just like that, I said quietly, with my hand on my chest. Because if I learned one thing from her, it's that dignity is not negotiable. After lunch, I went to the bedroom and pulled an old folder from under the mattress. Inside were all the house papers, the deed receipts, property documents, everything in my name. There was no power of attorney, nothing that gave Michael the right to sell without my consent, which meant that contract was a sham, something dirty, and maybe something illegal. I put the papers away again, but this time with a new intention. And for the first time in a long time, I fell asleep with a faint smile on my lips. The next day, I went to St. Augustine's parish, lit a candle for my Linda, and gave thanks for the peace she always taught me to cultivate even in the hardest times. Then I walked through the downtown square, bought some fresh bread, and sat on a bench to watch life go by. Kids running, old men playing checkers, vendors yelling, "Hot dogs, get your hot dogs!" And I thought life doesn't end just because you've been betrayed. It just starts over. I went home with a clearer mind. I knew what I had to do, but I was in no hurry. Because like we used to say back home, an old bull doesn't charge. He waits for the right moment. They think they caught me off guard, that the old man is helpless, that I have no strength left. But they forgot something. The most dangerous strength is the one that comes from silence. After that visit, I barely slept for 2 nights. I kept waking up with the image of Michael standing in my kitchen, arms crossed with that hard face as if I were a stranger. Sometimes you think you know the children you raise until one day life shows you otherwise. I still couldn't understand at what point my son stopped being family and became a threat. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to throw me out like a dog. No. This old man has lived too long to accept a humiliation like this. On Wednesday morning, I put on a clean linen shirt, combed my hair the best I could in front of the mirror, and walked towards the downtown area. My steps were slow but steady. No one would have noticed, but inside every step was a decision. First, I went to see Edward, an old friend from my days as a truck driver on Route 88. He now works as a paralegal at a notary's office. He's not a lawyer, but he's been around paperwork and legal processes for years, and he knows how these things work. He welcomed me with open arms, offered me a coffee with cinnamon, and asked how I was doing. I told him everything straight to the point. From Michael's arrival with the lawyer to the papers I had kept hidden for decades. He listened with a furrowed brow and tight lips. Then he asked to see the documents. I took out the folder and placed it on the table. He spent more than half an hour reviewing every single paper. He took out his phone, snapped some pictures, made some calls. I just watched him in silence. Finally, he took off his glasses and said, "David, something doesn't add up here. Legally, you are still the sole owner. There is no authorization that would allow your son to have signed for the sale without your signature." I felt a knot in my stomach. It was what I suspected, but hearing it out loud churned everything inside me. Edward looked at me seriously. "This could be serious. Someone either forged your signature or they gave you a manipulated contract. Are you sure you haven't signed anything lately?" I swore to him I hadn't. Not a single paper, not a single stroke of a pen. He nodded. "Then this smells like fraud." He explained that to prove it, we needed a forensic review of the supposed sale documents. And for that, we needed to see the original contract, not just a copy. I remembered that the lawyer who came with Michael took all the papers and only left a printed copy. Edward told me the best thing to do was to hire a real lawyer, someone who could start legal proceedings if necessary. He recommended a lawyer named Monica Evans who specialized in property cases and family fraud. He wrote down her address on a small piece of paper and told me, "Go see her, David. This woman can't be bought by anyone." I left the office with the folder under my arm and a mix of anguish and determination in my chest. I walked to the church downtown, sat on a pew, and closed my eyes. I thought of Linda, of how she always said that blood doesn't always guarantee a heart. And that thought hurt because I always believed Michael was the more noble of my two sons. Matthew, the younger one, was more impulsive, more distant. But Michael, he was my pride. A college graduate married with kids, and now he was the one trying to kick me out of my own house. At what point did it all break? The next day, I took the train to the part of town where Monica's office was. The ride was long, and as the train car moved forward, I replayed my whole life as if it were a series of photographs. Linda with her apron covered in flour. Michael playing with a wooden truck I made for him with my own hands. Christmas in the backyard with lights strung up in the trees. All of it seemed so distant now. I arrived at the office right on time. Monica greeted me kindly, but without pity. I liked that. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with her hair tied back and a direct gaze. I explained everything from the beginning. She listened attentively, took notes, asked to see the documents. After reviewing them, she looked at me intently. "Mr. Miller, we have a case here. If what you're telling me is true, we are looking at a possible case of property theft and document forgery. And that isn't solved with a family talk. That's resolved in court." I asked if that meant sending my own son to jail. She took a deep breath. "That depends. But before any punishment, the first thing is to defend your rights, your house, your dignity." That word made me swallow hard. Dignity. I felt Linda squeezing my hand from another world. Monica proposed that we immediately file a request to review the contract at the Public Property Records Office and at the same time file a lawsuit for nullification due to a forged signature. I said yes without hesitation. She asked me to sign some documents, and as I did, I felt strange, as if the old man who had learned to stay on the sidelines was finally crossing a line. But not out of pride, out of justice. I returned home that afternoon with a strange weariness, not physical, but in my soul. Buddy greeted me as always, wagging his tail, loyal as few are. I gave him water, put out his food, and sat in my rocking chair. The sun was setting through the trees in the yard, and the sky had that orange hue that Linda loved so much. I looked at her portrait, and for the first time in days, I spoke to her with a firm voice. "My love, I've started. I don't know how this will end, but I'm not going to let them walk all over me." That night, I ate alone as I have for years. But something was different. Inside, I no longer felt defeated. I hadn't won anything yet, but I hadn't lost either. Because some battles begin in silence with a fire in your heart. And this one was just getting started. On Friday morning, while I was pruning some plants in the yard, I heard someone knocking insistently at the gate. Buddy, as always, was the first to arrive, barking. I wiped my hands on the rag tucked into my belt and went to see. It was Michael, alone. No lawyer, no documents, no smiles. He was wearing a light blue shirt, a bit wrinkled, and his face was tense. I looked at him calmly, without opening the gate. "What do you need?" I asked bluntly. He looked down for a second, as if he didn't know where to begin. Then he lifted his head with that expression I know so well. The one he used as a kid when he knew he'd done something wrong but didn't want to admit it. "Can we talk?" he said. Not out here on the street. I hesitated for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to slam the gate in his face, but another part I needed to hear him out. I opened it without another word. He came in without looking around, much as if he were afraid of running into memories. We sat in the kitchen. I offered him coffee. He didn't answer. I poured it anyway. He stared at the cup like it was an enemy. "Dad, I was told you went to see a lawyer," he blurted out. I picked up my cup, blew on it calmly, and replied, "That's right. And I also went to the public records office and the notary, and to an old friend who knows more about the law than you and that lawyer you brought here." I saw him swallow hard. His face changed, from worried to restrained anger. "Dad, it didn't have to come to this. We could have talked about it as a family," he said, in a low but loaded voice. I looked at him firmly. "Family? Did you talk to me like family when you walked in here with a lawyer without any warning? When you told me this wasn't my house anymore?" He fell silent. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. Then he stood up, paced around the kitchen a bit, and sat back down. "Dad, you know things aren't easy. The house was worth a lot, and we needed the money." That sentence hit me like a stone. "So you sold me. Did you put a price on me too?" Michael lowered his head. "It wasn't like that," he mumbled. "I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, 'You know what hurts the most, son? It's not the sale. It's that you didn't even have the courage to come alone. You brought a stranger to kick me out of here, and you did it as if I no longer mattered. As if I were part of the inventory." The silence returned, but this time it wasn't weighing on me. It was weighing on him. A few minutes passed. Then we heard the back door open. It was Ethan, my grandson Michael's oldest son. He's 17. Tall, skinny, with that rebellious hair that always hangs over his eyes. He saw me sitting there and greeted me with a smile. Then he saw his father, and his face changed. "What are you doing here?" he asked seriously. Michael tried to calm him down with a gesture. "I just came to talk to your grandfather." But Ethan didn't buy it. "Talk or pressure him to leave, because if you came for that, you'd better go." I was surprised by the firmness in his voice. This wasn't the same quiet kid from before. Michael stood up. "This is none of your business, Ethan. This is between adults." But the boy didn't back down. "Of course it's my business. He's my grandfather, and you're treating him like he's a burden. Have you already forgotten everything he did for you?" The tension rose. I stood up slowly and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Easy, son. We're not here to fight." Ethan looked at me, his eyes shining. "It's just not fair, Grandpa. They can't treat you like this." I gave him a little pat. "I know. And that's why I'm doing what I have to do. But without hate. With a clear head." Michael was red in the face, biting back his words. He looked at me and said, "I just wanted to fix this without lawyers." I answered him clearly. "Then you should have thought of that before you brought one here. Now it's not just your business. It's mine. And it's a matter for the courts." He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned and spat out. "You're making a mistake," I replied. "The mistake was yours. But the difference is I'm willing to face mine." After he left, Ethan and I sat in the yard. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted orange and gray. He told me he hadn't been able to sleep since he found out what was happening. That he heard his parents talking at night about the grandpa problem, and that he felt betrayed too. He hugged me tight. "I'm with you, Grandpa, no matter what." I felt a warmth in my chest, because in the midst of so much disappointment, that hug was a breath of fresh air. The next day, Monica called me. She said they had officially started the process to stop any eviction attempt, that the judge had received the request, and that there would be a preliminary hearing in the coming days. She explained that Michael and his wife would be notified, and that I needed to be emotionally prepared, because what was coming wouldn't be easy. I thanked her, not just for the legal work, but for the way she spoke to me, not treating me like a poor old man, but like a man who deserved respect. That afternoon, I went back to the church. I sat in the last row and closed my eyes. I didn't pray with words. I just took a deep breath and remembered Linda's face. I imagined what she would tell me if she were here, and I knew. Do the right thing, David, but don't lose your soul in the process. 3 days after Michael's visit, someone knocked on the door of his house across town. It was a process server from the court. He came with the notification in hand, a formal lawsuit for nullification due to a forged signature and an immediate suspension of any transaction on the property. Ethan told me about it that same afternoon, his eyes wide as saucers. Grandpa, my dad, turned pale. Mom locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out. I didn't say anything. I just settled deeper into my rocking chair and continued peeling a tangerine. You knew that was going to happen, didn't you? He asked. I gave him a small smile. Son, when you do the right thing, things start moving on their own. That night, according to Ethan, there was shouting at his house. Loud shouting. His mother, Jessica, was yelling at Michael for doing everything without proper consultation, for complicating everything. She thought I would just leave quietly, that I wouldn't lift a finger. She said it in those exact words. And Michael, for the first time in a long time, was speechless. According to Ethan, he just said, "What did you want me to do? My dad always just stays quiet." I never thought he would fight back. There's the problem, I thought. They saw me as quiet, but they judged me as weak. The next morning, I received an unexpected call. It was Jessica. "Mr. Miller," she said in a forced, almost theatrical voice. "Can we talk?" I said yes, but at the square, not in my house. We met on one of the benches under the big trees. She arrived dressed as she always does, with her designer blouses, low heels, flawless makeup. But something in her face was different. There was tension and fear. "Mr. Miller, I just don't want this to end badly." "Think about it. You're getting older. Wouldn't it be better for you to live in a more comfortable, smaller, more manageable place?" I took a deep breath. "Are you suggesting I give up?" She was surprised. No. I'm just saying sometimes it's better to avoid a scandal." I looked her in the eyes. "A scandal for who? For me, who is just defending my home? Or for you, who tried to kick me out without even a conversation?" Jessica looked down. Her voice trembled. "It's just that Michael doesn't know how to deal with you. He sees you as so stubborn." I laughed to myself. "I'm not stubborn. I'm steadfast. It's not the same thing." She tried to smooth things over, to convince me with sweet words, to talk about family and peace. But I wasn't buying those speeches anymore. In the end, she asked me to think about an amicable solution. I answered with what Linda always used to say. "Friendships are nurtured. Betrayals are confronted." She left without touching me, her expression frozen. She knew she didn't stand a chance. The following days were a whirlwind. Monica, the lawyer, informed me that the preliminary hearing would be in 2 weeks, that Michael was required to appear, and that, in the meantime, the court had blocked any transaction involving the house. The most important thing is that they can't move forward with anything without your authorization. You are legally protected, she explained. I felt a sense of relief. It wasn't the end, but it was a reprieve. That afternoon, I went for a walk through the local market. I greeted Mr. Gregory, the man who sells spices, and Mrs. Stella, who always saves a sweet roll for me. They all asked how I was, and I just replied, living as one should. But inside I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Dignity. Not for winning a fight, but for knowing I hadn't let myself be trampled. That same week, I received a letter slid under my door. It was from Matthew, my younger son. We hadn't heard from him in years. He was living in another state with his partner, a very different life, always distant from family conflicts. But the letter said, "Dad, Ethan told me what's happening. I didn't know Michael had gone this far. I just want you to know that I'm with you, and if you need anything, just say the word." It was hard not to cry because even though Matthew was always distant deep down, he respected me. And that letter was worth more than 1,000 apologies from Michael. The days grew more tense. A car with tinted windows started parking across from my house every afternoon. They never got out. They just watched. Maybe they were from the lawyer. Maybe Michael wanted to intimidate me. But I paid them no mind. I'd give them a wave from the yard. Let them know this old man doesn't hide. One afternoon, Ethan came running. "Grandpa, my parents are fighting worse than ever. My mom wants to go to her parents' house. She says she's not going to stick around to face a public scandal." I hugged him. "I'm sorry, son. This isn't your fault." "I know," he replied. "But it's unfair that you have to go through this." I stroked his hair. Sometimes for things to change, someone has to take the first punch. He looked at me with a mix of pride and sadness. "I want to be like you, Grandpa," I replied with a smile. "No, Ethan. You're going to be better." The hearing was approaching, and although my body ached more than usual, my spirit was firmer than ever. Linda was with me in every thought. And in the silence of the house between warm toast and the smell of coffee, I understood something that changed everything. This isn't just about the house. It's about my story, about who I am, about what I leave behind. The morning of the hearing was cold, with a thick blanket of clouds covering the Chicago sky. I got up early as usual. I made my coffee and sat for a few minutes in my rocking chair before leaving. Buddy looked at me, not understanding much, but with that silent loyalty that only old dogs have. I put on the same white linen shirt I wore to Ethan's baptism, and a gray jacket that Linda had given me for an anniversary. I wanted to go as someone defending something sacred, not as a defeated man. Monica picked me up at 8:30 sharp. Her car smelled of lavender and new paper. She was serious, focused, as always. "Are you ready, Mr. Miller?" she asked as she drove. "I've been ready since the day they tried to kick me out of my house without telling me the truth." She nodded. She said no more. The courthouse was full of strangers. Lawyers from other cases, clerks with folders, and people with tired eyes. They made us wait in a small room with wooden benches. When they finally called our case, I walked in slowly but surely. At the back, Michael and Jessica were already there, sitting next to their lawyer, the same one who had come to my house weeks ago. They looked at me. Michael dropped his gaze. Jessica held her head high, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge was an older man, about 60, with a serious face and not much patience. He began by reading the case summary. He mentioned my full name, Michael's, and the case number. Then he asked the plaintiff's side to speak. Monica stood up, elegant and clear. She explained that I was the sole legal owner of the property for over 40 years, that there was no power of attorney or any document allowing my son to sell the property, and therefore the signature on the contract was a forgery. We request Your Honor the nullification of the sales contract, as it is a fraudulent act, and that a corresponding criminal investigation be opened if the forgery is confirmed. She concluded with a firm voice. Michael's lawyer asked to speak. He said that his client acted with the family's well-being in mind, that the sale was an attempt to resolve financial situations, and that there was a misunderstanding in the method, but not the intention. I had to swallow a laugh. How easy it is to disguise greed with pretty words. The judge then asked for my statement. I stood up, walked to the front, and leaned on the edge of the table. I looked at Michael and then at the judge. Your Honor, this house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the place where I raised my children, where I buried my wife, where I have cried for years without anyone seeing me. I'm not rich. I don't have much. But this is mine. I built it with my hands. I signed for it with my life. And today, someone I brought into this world tried to snatch it away from me as if I didn't exist. I paused for a moment. The judge listened without blinking. I didn't come here to fight over bricks. I came here for my name to be respected. And if anyone thinks that because I have wrinkles and walk a little slower that I'm worthless, they are deeply mistaken. I returned to my seat. The silence in the room was as heavy as lead. The judge then called for the handwriting analysis of the signature. Monica had requested it days before, and it was already in the file. The results were read aloud. The signature of Mr. David Miller on the sales contract does not match the comparative samples provided. It is confirmed to be a forgery. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand. Michael closed his eyes. There was nothing more to say. The judge ordered the definitive suspension of the sales contract, the nullification of the act, and requested that the district attorney's office open an investigation for possible document forgery. I didn't celebrate. I didn't raise my arms. I just breathed, deeply, like someone filling their lungs again after being held underwater for a long time. Outside, Ethan was waiting for me with a bag of donuts. "You won, Grandpa," he said with excitement. I hugged him. "I didn't win, son. I just defended what was right." We walked together to the corner. Monica came with us. She thanked me for my trust. "You taught me that some battles are fought without raising your voice." I thanked her back not with words, but with a look that said everything. Days later, Michael came to the house alone. He didn't knock on the gate. He just stood on the other side. I saw him from the yard. He didn't shout, he didn't ask to come in. He just said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I didn't answer. Not out of pride, but because some wounds can't be healed with apologies. I just nodded my head and went back inside. I don't know what will happen to him or his marriage or everything he built far away from me, but I know that this house will continue to stand, and more importantly, so will I. After the hearing, the house became quieter than ever, not with sadness, but with peace. For the first time in years, I felt that this roof wasn't weighing me down, but protecting me again. Buddy noticed it too. He'd lie closer to me as if he understood that something profound had changed. I woke up each morning with less anxiety in my chest. My coffee tasted better, and my steps, though just as slow, felt firmer. Michael never came back. After that brief dry apology in front of the gate, I heard nothing more from him. Ethan told me his father barely spoke, that he spent his afternoons locked in his study, and that Jessica had gone to her parents' house with the younger kids. "They say they're taking some time apart," he said. I didn't ask for more details. Not out of disinterest, but because I learned the hard way that some things are healed by time, and others you just have to let rot on their own. One ordinary morning while I was sweeping the patio, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Dad." I turned around, and there was Matthew, my younger son, grayer, with a grown-out beard, a backpack on his shoulder, and a guilty look in his eyes. We hadn't seen each other in years, maybe not since Linda's funeral. "Can I come in?" I gestured with my head. He walked in silently, like someone who isn't sure if he belongs. We sat in the kitchen. I poured him coffee, as always, as if no time had passed. Matthew took a sip and looked at me. I heard what happened. Ethan kept me updated. I wanted to come sooner, but I didn't know if I'd be welcome. I answered him directly. "This is your house, son, not because of the paperwork, but because of the life you lived here." He nodded, looking down. I was never so far away, and at the same time so close. I saw how they were treating you, how they were slowly pushing you out. I was part of that abandonment too. I listened to him in silence because his words weren't asking for judgment, just a place to land. "Michael really messed up," he said after a moment. "And so did I for staying silent for so many years." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, I'm not looking for someone to blame. I'm just learning to live with what's left." Matthew took a deep breath. "And what is left, Dad?" I answered without hesitation. "Peace, and you can't put a price on that." He stayed at the house for a few days. He helped clean the gutters. He painted a section of the fence that was peeling. He fixed a leaky faucet in the bathroom that had been dripping for months. We didn't talk much, but the silence was different. It was companionship, not distance. Sometimes we'd go to the market together like we used to. Everyone in the neighborhood was surprised. "Well, look at Matthew. Where have you been, kid?" He would just smile, a little embarrassed. So would I. One afternoon, while we were drinking iced tea in the yard, he said, "I've been thinking about staying for a while if you don't mind." I replied with a simple gesture. I lifted the pitcher and poured him some more. Matthew understood. "Thanks, Dad." I just said, "You'll know when it's time to go." Around that time, Monica also visited. She came to drop off the final papers from the lawsuit. All signed, sealed, closing the case. "The house is officially safe. No one can touch it without your consent. It's yours legally and definitively." I offered her a seat for a while. She accepted. We chatted about her family, her childhood, the injustices she's seen as a lawyer. She confessed something to me that stuck with me. "The most painful cases I see aren't between strangers. They're between parents and children. Because when that bond breaks, no contract can repair it." I thanked her for everything, but especially for believing in an old man that nobody else was listening to. Over time, people in the neighborhood learned the story. Some congratulated me, others stayed quiet. But all of them, every single one, looked at me differently. No longer as the quiet old man on the corner, but as someone who demanded respect. And believe me, that carries more weight than any inheritance. One Sunday, Ethan came over alone, unannounced. He had a notebook in his hand. "What's that you got there, son?" I asked. He sat across from me, nervous. "I want you to tell me your story, Grandpa. Everything. From when you were a boy, how you met Grandma, how you built this house. I want to write it down." I was moved, deeply. "Why, son?" "Because I don't want anyone else to tell it for you. Because I want to remember it correctly. And because I want my children, when I have them, to know who you were." I agreed, with tears burning inside me, because in the end, maybe that was the most valuable thing I could leave behind. my voice, my story, my truth, written by someone who actually wanted to listen. Ethan arrived early that Saturday with a spiral notebook, a thermos of coffee, and 2 sweet rolls he knows I like. "Today I want to start from the very beginning, Grandpa," he said. "From when?" I asked. "From before you were a dad. From when you were just David." We sat in the yard under the shade of the lemon tree I planted myself when Michael was a baby. The sun was warm and slanted, and the air smelled of damp earth. I looked at him for a moment, so young, his eyes full of curiosity, and I told him, "All right. But listen with your heart, not just your ears, because some things can't be written down, they can only be felt." He took notes from the very first word. I told him I was born in 1944 on the south side of Chicago, when the streets were still dirt and horses still delivered milk. That my father was a carpenter and my mother was a seamstress. There were 7 of us kids, and even though we ate beans almost every day, we never lacked a roof over our heads or a hand to soothe our foreheads when we slept. I told him about my first job shining shoes outside the old Maxwell Street Market, where I learned to look men in the eye. "Their son, I understood that respect isn't demanded, it's earned," Ethan wrote in silence, attentively. Sometimes he'd ask me to repeat a phrase, other times he'd just nod, moved. I told him how I met Linda. It was at a church bake sale at St. Augustine's. She was selling pies with her aunt. I was wearing shoes that were too tight, but I worked up the courage to ask her to dance anyway. We danced 2 songs and then she said she had to get back to her booth. We both smiled. "And how did you know she was the one?" he asked. "Because when she walked away, it felt like the air had been pulled out of my lungs, and I never wanted to feel that way about anyone else ever again." Hours passed and I told him how we started building this house. At first it was just 2 rooms and a bathroom, no finishes, no luxuries. Linda and I slept on a mattress on the floor, and the kitchen was a small grill outside, but it was ours. I laid every brick with my own hands, hammered every nail, twisted every piece of wire. "I didn't buy this house, Ethan. I planted it. Like you plant a tree." And he wrote it down just like that. Then the children came. Michael was born first strong, a loud crier with a cowlick that never stayed down. Linda said he was going to be stubborn like me, and he was. Matthew was born 3 years later, quieter, more reserved. I worked as a driver for a trucking company. Linda took care of the house and did sewing for the neighbors. It wasn't easy, but we were happy. There was always food on the table and love in our nights, I told him. As I spoke, I noticed Ethan wasn't just writing with a pencil. He was writing with his soul. He looked at me with those eyes that don't judge, that only want to understand. I told him how I lost Linda. Pancreatic cancer, fast, cruel, silent. I was left alone with the house and with the echo of her laughter. After she was gone, the days grew longer, and my sons grew more distant. I didn't dwell on that part. It wasn't the time. Ethan understood. When we stopped for lunch, he asked me something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think about leaving here, Grandpa, selling the house?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, once, right after Linda's funeral. I sat on that bench in the yard and thought, why stay here if she's gone? But then I heard Buddy whimpering, and I remembered that someone had to keep watering the garden. That love doesn't really leave. It hides in the walls, in the corners, in your habits." After we ate, we continued. I told him about life before the internet, before phones in every pocket. I told him how we used to go to the park on Sundays with the boys, how we'd buy lemon ice from the cart on the corner. I told him about the respect people used to have for their elders, how your word was your bond. Now, a lot of people think age is a burden, that old folks are in the way. But they don't realize that without us, they wouldn't be where they are. Ethan stopped there. He closed his notebook for a moment. Grandpa, I've been unfair to you too. I looked at him. Why do you say that, son? Because I saw you as someone from the past. Like you were just here, quiet, waiting. But now I understand that you're the root of everything. Of my dad. Of my life, of this story. I was moved, but I didn't say anything. I just squeezed his shoulder, firmly. The way gratitude is passed between men who understand each other without speaking. As evening fell, he asked for permission to take pictures of the house. Of the cracks in the walls, the old gate, the tree I planted with Linda. I want everything documented, not just what you say, but also what can be seen. I told him yes because I understood that what he was doing wasn't just for him. It was for the generations to come. So that one day when I'm gone, someone will say David Miller lived here, a man who refused to be broken. That night, Ethan stayed over in the room that used to be Matthew's. Before turning off the light, he said from the doorway, "Thanks, Grandpa, for trusting me with your story." I replied from my rocking chair, "Take care of it, son. Not like a secret, but like a treasure." A few weeks passed since Ethan started writing my story. Every weekend he would come with his notebook, his recorder, and that look of someone who isn't just visiting, but coming to listen. He would ask for details for dates, and sometimes while I was talking, I'd see him wipe his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. But the most curious thing started happening outside of this house. One afternoon, Ethan told me he had read a piece of the story at his school. It was in a literature class, and the teacher had asked for autobiographical texts. He, without saying it was his, read the part where I told him how I met Linda at the church fair. According to him, when he finished reading, the whole class was silent. Nobody said anything for several seconds. Then a classmate raised her hand and asked, "Is that man still alive?" Ethan replied that yes, he was his grandfather. And that's where it all began. A few days later, a teacher called him aside. She asked if he could share the text with a friend of hers who worked at a community radio station in Chicago. Not to make him famous, she said, but because there are many elderly people who need to hear something like this. A story with soul. Ethan told me about it with excitement. I, as usual, remained quiet for a while before answering. "And what do you think, son? I think your story can help others. Grandfathers like you who sometimes have no one left to listen to them." I thought about it all night. I walked around the yard. I sat on the concrete bench where Linda used to keep her potted plants. And I looked at the walls of this house as if seeing them for the first time. Every crack held a memory. Every old tile a conversation. I always believed that living with dignity was enough. That you didn't need applause or tributes. But maybe, just maybe, telling your story was also a part of dignity. Because silence often turns into forgetting. And I didn't want my story to be forgotten. So I told Ethan I accepted. That if this man from the radio wanted to talk to me, we would. But on one condition. That they didn't make anything up. That they didn't embellish my words. That they tell my story as it is, with dirt on my hands and a little hot sauce on my toast. A week later, a man named Joaquin Ramirez came to visit. He was a man in his 50s with a sparse beard and light eyes. He brought an old recorder, the kind you don't see anymore, and a soft voice like a young grandfather. He sat at the table with me, took out his notebook, and said, "Mr. Miller, first of all, thank you for having me. What you've experienced, many people experience in silence, and I think we need to hear it." I nodded. "I'm not a writer or an artist. I'm just an old man who didn't want to leave quietly." Joaquin smiled. "Sometimes those are the ones we need to hear the most." The interview lasted almost 2 hours. We talked about everything. My childhood, Linda Michaels' betrayal, the lawsuit, Ethan. What it means to be old in a country that often makes you invisible. I told him how some days you wake up and your body aches, but the heaviest thing isn't your back. It's the silence of having no one to tell anything to. I told him there are thousands like me sitting in old chairs looking out the window, waiting for someone to look back. And that although some want to make us believe we're no longer valuable, we still have something no one else has. Memory. When he left, Joaquin shook my hand firmly. Thank you for your courage. This story isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone. I didn't know what would happen next, but I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. As if this life, with all its wounds, still had something to give. Days later, Ethan arrived flustered. Grandpa, the show is out. They broadcast it on the community radio on a segment called Neighborhood Voices. He put the headphones on me, and there I was with my trembling but firm voice talking about things I never thought would be heard outside these walls. At the end of the program, Joaquin said something that moved me to tears. David Miller taught us that silence is not the same as resignation, that sometimes when an old man speaks, the world should be quiet and listen. The next morning, a neighbor knocked on the gate. Mrs. Lupita, a woman who lives 3 houses down, a widow, for 20 years, looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I heard your story on the radio, and I felt like you were speaking for my husband. He died waiting for his children to visit. Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't." I hugged her, for a long time, with respect. From that day on, letters started arriving. Yes, letters. Some left under the gate, others delivered by Ethan. People from Indiana, from Wisconsin, from Michigan. Elderly people. Regretful children. Confused grandchildren. All with something in common. They wanted to thank me for not staying silent. I didn't seek fame. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted respect. And without meaning to, I ended up finding something more powerful. An echo. My voice was no longer just mine. One morning while I was making oatmeal, there was a soft knock on the door. It wasn't Ethan or a neighbor. It was Monica, the lawyer. She was with an elegant woman about 60 years old, with a folder under her arm. She introduced herself as Teresa Alarcón, coordinator of the Voices of Experience program, an initiative that aimed to highlight the life stories of senior citizens throughout the state. She greeted me with respect, with a sincere smile, but also with the look of someone bringing a proposal. We sat at the table, had coffee, and then she explained, "Mr. Miller, your story has become well known. The radio interview had a huge impact. We received dozens of messages asking about you, your story, your courage. We want to invite you to be a special speaker at our next event in the city, where we'll be talking about the neglect of senior citizens, the right to housing, and above all, respect." I listened in silence. She spoke with measured, sweet, almost poetic words. She talked about giving a speech, about telling my story, in a venue full of people with cameras, with young people, with other grandparents like me. Your testimony can inspire, it can open eyes, it can change the way we see old age in this country. I didn't answer right away. The truth is, I didn't know what to say. Monica looked at me as if asking with her eyes what I was thinking. I just said, "Can I think about it?" Teresa smiled. "Of course. We just wanted you to know that your voice is no longer just yours." She left me a card and they said their goodbyes warmly. After they left, I went out to the yard. The sun was just setting over the lemon tree. I sat on the bench and stayed there for a long time. I wasn't afraid to speak. I had already done that. What bothered me was something else. What if by telling my story one more time it became foreign? What if by making it public it stopped being mine? I thought about Linda. How discreet she was, a woman of few words, but strong as an oak tree. She wouldn't have wanted me to expose myself like that. But she also wouldn't have wanted me to stay silent if it helped others. I thought about Ethan, about what this legacy meant to him, about the letter Matthew had left me before going back home. What you did, Dad, wasn't just for you. It was for all of us who didn't dare. I didn't sleep much that night. I got up 3 times, once to check if Buddy had water, another to see if it was windy in the yard, and the last time just to look at the house in silence, to walk through its rooms, to run my hand over the door frames, to hear the faint echo of my own footsteps. All of this that they almost took from me, all of this that I defended. The next morning I called Ethan. "Son, could you come over this afternoon? There's something I want to tell you." He arrived at noon with his notebooks and his usual smile. We sat down with a couple of tacos we made together. And then I asked him, what would you do if you were asked to speak out loud about something that hurts, but that might help others? He didn't hesitate. I would tell it, scared, nervous. But I would tell it, because if I don't, maybe no one will. I told him about the event, the speech, the stage. He listened carefully. Then he looked at me intently. "Grandpa, nobody can force you to do anything. But if you decide to speak, I'll be right there by your side." And that was enough for me. That afternoon I called Teresa. "I accept," I told her, "but on one condition. Let me speak as I am. No script. No fancy words." She smiled on the other end of the line. "That's exactly what we want, Mr. Miller." Over the next few days, Ethan helped me prepare some notes. Not a speech, just ideas, key memories, phrases I wanted to say. We practiced a few times in the yard. I made mistakes. I stopped. I laughed. But every time I spoke, something within me became stronger, as if I finally understood that everything I had lived through had a greater purpose. The day arrived. I put on my best pants, the blue linen shirt that Linda loved, and a hat I had kept for years. Ethan came with me, his eyes shining. There were over 100 people in the auditorium. Seniors, students, social workers, journalists. When they introduced me, there was a long round of applause. I walked slowly to the microphone. My hands were shaking a little, but my voice came out firm. "My name is David Miller. I am 81 years old, and until recently they wanted to kick me out of my own house. Not by strangers, by my own son." The silence was total. I told my whole story, without anger, without exaggeration, like someone sharing, not like someone accusing. I spoke of Linda, of Ethan, of justice, of respect, and I closed with something that came from my soul. In this country, old people are often seen as a burden, but we are the roots, and if the roots dry up, the tree has no future. The applause that followed didn't make me happy. It made me strong, because I knew in that moment that I was not alone. When we got home after the event, the sky was painted a soft orange that faded into the treetops. Ethan helped me take off my jacket, offered me a cup of tea, and we sat for a while in the yard. Buddy lay at my feet, as always. We didn't talk much that night. Sometimes the silence between us said more than any words. I looked at the house with new eyes, not because it had changed, but because I finally felt different within it. This house that was once a threat was now a shelter again. My walls, my yard, my story, and now my voice. The next day, Ethan arrived early. He was carrying something wrapped in brown paper tied with a red ribbon. "This is for you, Grandpa." I opened it slowly. It was a book, small, hardcover. On the cover was the title, David Miller, Memoirs of a Man Who Refused to Be Broken. I opened it and began to look through the pages. It was all there. From my childhood to the trial, from Linda to Ethan. My words, my phrases, my silences too. "I printed it with my savings," he said. "Just 10 copies. For you, for Matthew, for the neighbors, for the school library, and for me." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him. For a long time. In silence. Like the hugs you give when explanations are no longer needed. That afternoon, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. People greeted me from every corner. Mrs. Stella gave me a sweet roll. Mr. Gregory offered me some spices without charging. A little boy came up to me and said, "Are you the man from the radio?" I smiled. "Yes, son." "The same one who still eats toast with a little hot sauce." Everyone laughed. I did too. But deep inside me, something settled. I was no longer invisible. That night, I sat in my rocking chair and opened the book again. I read my own words aloud. I heard myself tell how I met Linda, how I built this house, how I lost, and how I resisted. And right there, I understood something I'd never said out loud. Justice doesn't always give you back what was taken from you, but it gives you back what you should never have let them take in the first place. Your self-respect. The next day, I received a letter. It was from Matthew. He told me he read the entire book in one night, that he cried, that he laughed, that he felt proud to carry my last name. Dad, what you did was more than just defend a house. It was teaching all of us not to be afraid to say enough. I tucked that letter inside the book between the pages where I talk about them, my sons. Because even if they don't all come back, at least they'll know who I am. Michael never came back. I don't expect him to. I don't hold a grudge. But I'm not looking for a reconciliation either. Because some things can't be fixed with a forced hug. They are fixed with truth. And if one day he wants to know it, he knows where to find it. In these pages. In this house. In the memory of an old man who did not kneel. Days later, Ethan asked to read a passage from the book at his school's cultural festival. He did it in front of everyone. He said, "My grandfather taught me that dignity has no age and that memory is the bravest form of resistance." They gave him a standing ovation. I wasn't there, but he told me all about it. And that was enough for me. Today, as I write these final words, because yes, I also wanted to leave my own ending written by my own hand. I want to say something to whoever listens to me, reads me, or remembers me. There is no worse abandonment than the one you inflict on yourself. There is no worse lie than believing you are no longer valuable. And there is no greater victory than to say with firmness, "Here I am, this is my life, and I am not giving it away to anyone." My name is David Miller, and if this story reached you, it's not because I sought revenge. It's because I chose to live with dignity until my last day. And now you tell me, how many Davids do you know in your neighborhood, in your family, in your own story, and what are you doing to make sure you don't become the one who ignores them?